Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 28 team selection. Pretty interesting game week here, as I think a lot of people are making that sort of decision of, what midfielders to buy, especially as you're sort of funneling out these Chelsea players. And now other people might have additional decisions like what to do with, a Chalobah, for example, which seems pretty simple. I guess if you have that single transfer towards Virgil van Dijk, that option is mostly there for most managers, or you can downgrade to maybe a Brentford defender, chance that Collins is not going to play over the next few games, or go for Konate, for example, to just save a little bit of money on Virgil. And actually to say that the bet is almost worth it, where the effective ownership's a lot lower. It's not 100% guaranteed that Virgil's always going to outscore Konate when it comes to attacking returns, as the XGI is not too dissimilar. And then at the same time, Konate actually has some pretty good DEFCON numbers himself. But within my own team for Game Week 27, we got 45 points. So it was a pretty dismal game week. I don't feel too bad about many of my benching dilemmas. Mostly because of the Maguire kind of early substitution within the West Ham game, where I think he had a bit of a knock with a hamstring and at least pulled something within that match there. It seemed like I wasn't 100% certain Maguire would have maybe started, even though he was in training throughout the whole week. But as it turns out, Lisandro Martinez was, diagnosed with a calf injury. He's 1 to 2 weeks out, and it seemed like Maguire was perfectly fine to play. Not that I think Euro was going to be a huge threat, but I was just more concerned about fitness, right? So Maguire seems fine. I think that's positive. It's nice that he scored a lot of points on my bench. Fair enough. I did always think that was a decent game for him. But I also wanted to back against Arsenal versus Tottenham, and I don't think Arsenal really conceded a lot of sort of well-built chances from Tottenham, right? I think if we're being honest, the main key chance of the game was obviously the Kolo Muani goal, where Declan Rice pretty much creates that chance for Arsenal. So another week where Declan Rice ruins my FPL team somehow. Timber did get subbed off, but I think there's a touch of an overreaction there. Yes, of course, he looked ragged in that game. I think he was tired. I think with the White injury, with him being on a yellow, I think it just made sense for him to get subbed off. I'm not so concerned about his minutes going forwards, but I can understand why managers are starting to be very concerned about him at this moment in time. I'm just saying that I'm not. As far as, let's say, the rest of the team and even the structure, I think I'm going to persist with the triple Arsenal defense up until really Game Week 31. There's no reason not to do so. I think the main benefit to owning the kind of Arsenal players is it's going to be still a pretty big differential going forwards, right? As people are sort of selling a Rice right now or selling a Timber this week, less Arsenal ownership is going to be in the field. And so I do feel quite comfortable owning some of these picks. But the time is probably gone for most of my midfielders, right? Palmer, I still think, yes, as good as Palmer could be from a ceiling sort of perspective, realistically, so many midfielders, I think, come comfortably close towards him. He has to be my cash cow. With Enzo, he might end up being the keep, because I do think, even if you look at the Chelsea fixtures, do I feel a bit better about Chelsea and Enzo's potential performance compared to, let's say, Lefebvre? Possibly. So I think I might keep Enzo, as he also saves me a bit more money. Or not saves me a bit more money, but saves me a bit more money in comparison to, let's say, if I was to take Palmer out of the team, right? And one out of the two were going to stay alongside maybe a Lefebvre. If he does stay, I think I'll probably keep Enzo, because Palmer just gives me so many routes. And I kind of illustrated that within the transfer plans. There were some very tight paths for me to keep Palmer, but they weren't flexible. And I think that's kind of the big issue with the Palmer moves, where when I use 2 free transfers in a week, which means that I'll be putting myself back into 1 free transfer in Game Week 29, anytime you kind of do that in FPL, I think there's natural flexibility when you've got money in the bank. You don't have that when you go for a 0.0 or a 0.1 type move. And that's kind of the situation that I find myself in, where I would like to just make that sort of move where I have that flexibility for the week coming after that, especially if there's any injuries. And then, yeah, I mean, the rest of the team looks pretty good. I do think Krupi Jr., despite playing 90 minutes, that the overall depth with Bournemouth is just inevitable. I think it almost seems like, if I was to just discuss pecking order of things, I think Evan Nilsson and Ryan seem to actually have their positions in the team relatively set in terms of guaranteeing consistent minutes outgoings, at least even in the short to medium term here, heading towards wildcard 32, which is the strategy that I'm going for. But I can't really say that still for a Krupi Jr., who, as we know, was benched before this game week where he played 90 minutes. So I do think it's time to say goodbye to Krupi. So those are going to be my 2 directional transfers. Richards, players like maybe even Timber going forwards, probably going to save a transfer for those players only on Game Week 31, as it's unlikely that I really need to tinker around with my defense. I think having Anderson double Arsenal defense, and Maguire is good to go. Yes, it's not as good as Virgil, but is it worth a free transfer? I still think that that's a luxury one. I can't afford a luxury one, and I'd still like to at least get towards Gameweek maybe 31 with 1 or 2 free transfers, and I'll talk about that too when we get to my transfer plan section, which is going to be a new segment with the team selection that I think some people would like to know if they're just thinking about plans ahead and how they've updated for me during the week. So yeah, that was the team. I also forgot to mention about Cole Palmer captaincy flopping. I mean, he had some good chances in the game, but nothing particular. And then, of course, the red card just ruined the game because it just took him off the pitch. Nothing to be said there. I think I would have taken that chance every time. It ends up giving me a red arrow, but I was very happy with the punt and the idea. And of course, I've gotten more than my fair share in terms of hauls from Cole Palmer. Do I feel absolutely peeved about people doing well with Virgil and Nico O'Reilly picks that I've owned for a long part of the season? A little bit, but this is what this game is sometimes with swings and roundabouts. Like I have owned Virgil for good fixtures. I have owned Nico O'Reilly for good fixtures. They're rearing its head again for those players. And I just congratulate owners who have enjoyed some of that positive variance so far, which I think my friend Marku on Twitter very aptly kind of pointed out what it's like feeling owning defenders and getting 60 points from them, I suppose, over 2 weeks. But yeah, let's just jump into this week for the team selection, Gameweek 29. So key thing with the Gameweek 29 team selection, I think, is once again this idea that a lot of people are looking to make these transfers because they have previously invested into these Chelsea players. So as we head into the Premier League predictions from 11 to 5 this week, I mean that's evidently the case with an Arsenal versus Chelsea fixture, where still the clean sheet odds are very, very high. Still actually the top of this week, but not too far away from some of the competing options, right? You've got Brentford close, you've got Bournemouth close, and Liverpool close. So the idea that Virgil's close and probably better than some of these options because he can also get DEFCON is clear. He's probably the best defender this week. Newcastle have a pretty good game as well. We've seen that Everton's attack has been pretty toothless as of late. So, not exactly a poor time to maybe think about buying a Newcastle defender as well. Just because Newcastle have a really good fixture in Game Week 31 as well. Defenders aren't players necessarily that you have to play every single week. There are 2 almost poor fixtures in between now and the wildcard 32, whereas there's 2 good fixtures too. So I think Newcastle's an interesting sort of direction of transfer. Brighton I'd probably pass up. Bournemouth is really good as well because their fixtures are just really clean. And then Hill and Senesi are still at outrageously good prices for what they can provide. Did they look terrible versus West Ham? I think so. They're very lucky to keep a clean sheet there. So does their defense look particularly good? I wouldn't say so. But yeah, just a bit of flavor for this week. In terms of goals, though, high-ish goals for Liverpool, of course, quite expected just because it is West Ham. And this is a West Ham team who I think over the course of the season have been a really poor defense. Have they almost taken a massive step up in recent memory? And can you challenge, for example, some of the modeling outputs? Sure. If you're someone who really does believe in the concept that you can kind of infer a lot from the recent form of a team and say that can continue, then of course I think you can challenge these numbers, but I think it is fair over the course of the season to have these kind of numbers, especially since it's a game at Anfield. But yeah, I would say West Ham actually do look like a really solid team. Not a particularly high scoring week predicted, and actually, amongst this, I think one thing I'll mention is that I think Spurs were so bad. Once again, if we go to the sort of form argument, I would actually be kind of shocked that Fulham's numbers are so low. I think maybe if there was an update in the model in terms of Fulham's numbers, maybe that could go higher as well. I wouldn't be surprised. Arsenal reasonably high considering it's Chelsea, but maybe we can also point out that Chelsea's defense just simply hasn't been good at all this season. They're actually bottom half in XGC. Otherwise, United with a great game, and this is also a Palace team who do play midweek. I'm recording this video before any midweek games have been played, other than Newcastle versus Karabag, of course, but that doesn't really matter because Newcastle pretty much got to fully rotate. They have a pretty good fixture as well, but nothing exceptional in terms of the expected goals. So a pretty low-scoring attacking week outside of, let's say, the Brentford game as well versus Burnley, right, where you see that 1.76 expected goals. But then equally, Brentford, I think, is a nice team to almost choose attackers from, because it's not like they have a lot of fullbacks who create a lot of attacking value or midfielders who provide anything more than assists most of the time. A lot of the XG is shared between that sort of trident at the top, and I think Sade is likely to start this game here, but not guaranteed. Whereas I think with Dango and at least Thiago, that's nailed at the bare minimum for Thiago. I don't think there's a justification that Dango is going to be benched for this game, but I think people can sort of make the consideration of you're buying Dango for the midweek fixture as well in Gameweek 29. So I think as we approach these fixtures, it does make sense as well to kind of look wider and stretch that view towards Gaming 32, generally speaking, I mean, still teams like Liverpool, Brentford in the short term, and even Fulham have some of the best short-term fixture runs over the next 3 to 4 games. City is up there as well, but because of Blind Gaming 31, unless you're going for a free at 31 strategy, there isn't much of a reason to kind of be super invested into Man City or super invested into Arsenal. I can make a fair point there, despite the fact that I'm actually invested into it. It's just that I'm not planning to get more invested in some of these teams or Crystal Palace. So that's kind of the picture and the slate in terms of the expected data for Gaming 28. Jumping into my own team selection, as I said, I do think Palmer is my cash cow. I do think Krupi's time is up in my team. He's served me really well. I think I've had maybe 3 goals from Krupi from 3 various starts, maybe 2. I can't quite remember, but for what a 4.5 asset is, or now a 4.7, maybe 4.8, I'm more than happy with what Krupi has provided for my team. Yeah, let's just say thank you and goodbye. In terms of defense, I'm fielding triple Chelsea defense. Just kidding, just playing triple Arsenal defense. I will be going with Raya, Gabriel, and Timber, and people will probably just point out to say, Chelsea's still a good attack. Why would you play Arsenal defense? I think when you look at the clean sheet odds, that's still an objective view in terms of Arsenal. Yes, of course, they've slipped up with clean sheets as of late, but we've had spurts this season where Arsenal's numbers, I think, for the most part, have been really good. Where, for example, the Tottenham XGC, the double game week XGC was all sort of within the realms of, on a per game basis, of something like 0.4, 0.5. That's elite. Those are the types of numbers that I think you can say in turn should lead to clean sheets. I'm not going to change my view on that because the underlying numbers are still there. It's not like Arsenal have fallen a cliff in terms of XGC, and I think that is more predictive in terms of future clean sheets than the goals that they've conceded. As I said, because they have had spurts this season where they keep a couple of clean sheets, keep a couple or opportunities amiss when it comes to keeping those clean sheets, but for the most part, they have just held strongly as one of the best defenses this season. So I'm not worried about that. I will take my chances once again. I'm not planning to play any Chelsea players, so there's no sort of competing, I guess, wants here. Maguire and Anderson will also be played. I think Maguire versus Crystal Palace just seems really enticing. Watching the game, Crystal Palace versus Wolves, I don't think I was impressed with Palace whatsoever until they were down, or up rather, 11 versus 10. So there's not much to be said about Crystal Palace right now. If I could get Richards out of my team with a luxury transfer, I would, but I don't need to, mostly because I can't. And Anderson, Tottenham also looked pretty awful versus Arsenal. Sure, they scored. Maybe could have even scored 2 if not for Raya's kind of heroics. But at the end of the day, I will take my chances. Anderson is someone who is back in the DEFCON now, playing alongside Bassi. And yeah, I just think with the home game here, that's always a good reason to consider playing someone like an Anderson on a week like this, especially since I don't have enough transfers to kind of go too beefed up in the midfield, for example. Then I'm going to line up in this 4-4-2 shape. So I will be playing, or sorry, in this sort of 4-3-3 shape here. So I will be benching Lefay this week and benching Enzo. So the order will be Lefay, then Enzo, then Richards, because I just don't think Richards is going to get much versus Man United. For whatever reason as well, he's not been getting DEFCON as of late, so he's going to be sitting deep at the back of my bench. I also expect them to possibly concede 2 versus United. If we remember going back to the graphic from 11-5, I mean, United are a lot closer to 2 goals than 1 goal. So pretty high chances that Richards kind of loses that -1 point as well. So probably the worst option in my team. And Enzo can just sort of play football versus Arsenal and get you those 2 points for the most part, right, as a baseline. But I will be playing Sobo. I will be playing Bruno as well. And we will be welcoming Wilson to the team. Wilson versus Dango is the main debate that a lot of people have, and I think I'll just use this time to kind of illustrate why I've gone for Wilson. I think I am planning to wildcard 32. I don't really see a world where I don't wildcard 32. I know I've seen some thoughts in terms of the timeline of some people who might want to wildcard a bit later in the season, but it's just something that I think I'm allergic to doing myself as a manager. I just like having a wild card lasting for more than 3-4 game weeks at a time, and that's pretty much it. There's nothing particular to that. It's just the idea that I think I'd like to see a wild card out. I'd like to set up a perfect bench boost in Gaming 33, make it as big as possible, hope for the best, and allow for that chance to happen. Sure, Dango has a better game in Gaming 32, but that doesn't matter to me. I think Wilson's minutes are just theoretically better. There's not as much competition for minutes. I think sort of claim or dominion over minutes is still much better than Dango's compared to, let's say, Thiago, for example, who I think clearly has the minutes that we're talking about from a Harry Wilson type perspective. When you look at Raul, he is also now having to compete his minutes versus Muniz. So Muniz coming back and also Fulham playing midweek football in Gaming 29 just makes me think that even over the course of those two games alone, it's very likely you'll see maybe a 60-40% split between the minutes of Raul and Muniz. And so what happens in those 40% of minutes when Fulham play? I think Wilson's the penalty taker too. So I think that's an additional incremental benefit going forwards, where with Raul playing less minutes and Muniz playing more minutes, that's probably more minutes where Wilson's the second penalty taker of the team, as long as Lukic is still out. And then on top of that, I think the set pieces do bridge the gap a little bit versus a Dango. The home games also bridge a little bit of the gap between Dango, who has amazing games when it comes to opponents, but then is playing them away from home. So yes, of course, Burnley away and Dango maybe is a bit better this week versus Harry Wilson, but I do think that if I was only to make one free transfer, I think Harry Wilson's still my preferred pick. Maybe I can top that up with Dango the week after, but it still makes more sense for me to go for Harry Wilson now because I can keep myself flexible. So what I'm sort of saying here is if I can only make one transfer for Palmer and I have to get one player, I'd much rather that one player be Wilson than Dango. Would I rather have a world or rather be living in a world where I own both Wilson and Dango? Sure, I want both of them because I think they're both fantastic picks. And compared to, let's say, players like Tavernier, can't guarantee the minutes. Compared to players like Ryan, I still think they have a little bit more to offer in terms of the balance of XGI and the balance of things like set pieces and additional sort of incremental things that can give you returns. So yeah, Harry Wilson's the pick that I'm going for. Even from a sort of grass point of view, if you want to put it like that, Harry Wilson, when I looked at Understat, I think is someone who is just a career stellar finisher. Dango is actually a pretty negative finisher. Now, I don't think they've played enough professional seasons for us to say definitively whether that's going to be true going forwards or not, but I think Wilson is an exceptional overperformer. I think that will say the same with Dango. I think the tale's kind of still a bit untold, but yeah, I think that's a fair argument to kind of make for Dango in his career so far still, to contextualize against someone like Wilson, who is a positive finisher and a very, very good one at that. And yeah, little things like set pieces and bonuses and chance creation through some of these set pieces will help Harry Wilson too. So yeah, looking forward to bring Wilson into the team, playing Sabo and playing Bruno. Captaincy we'll talk about in a moment, but then in the front line, I'm actually going to go with Thiago, Ekitike, and Haaland. So that means Krupi's gone, Thiago's in. You know, were there other forwards to consider? In my position where I'm tripled up on Arsenal, not considering 3 at 31, you know, Gyökeres is off the table. I don't think any other striker really entices me. Bowen has a terrible run of fixtures. Strand Larson has a terrible run of fixtures. Some of the other forwards just don't have the minutes that I want in terms of, let's say, a Raul. And then I also own Ekitike already. With Watkins, I think he's going to lose more minutes to Tammy Abraham. So that kind of really takes away the entire picture of potential forwards outside of a João Pedro, who just has a really poor fixture run. Like if I'm using this as an opportunity to start selling Chelsea players, I'm not going to suddenly also use this as an opportunity to buy other Chelsea players. So yeah, that will be Thiago. The only thing that kind of made me not want to go or to revisit and try to revisit a non-Thiago path is just the simple idea that he has extremely high ownership. But I think at the end of the day, you can't really argue with those fixtures. Is he still a better pick than some of the Brentford midfielders? I think so. So that's what it came down to. I can't also guarantee Krupi Jr.'s minutes, whereas I can at least guarantee Enzo Lefebvre's minutes, and I can always guarantee Enzo's minutes as well. So from that little perspective, if I'm trying to reduce the amount of transfers I make up until my next wildcard and potentially set myself up with a slightly better wildcard by having maybe 2 or 3 role transfers, I think this is the way to go. So that's the move that I'm going to make, Wilson and Thiago. So setting up with a 4-3-3, as I mentioned. Captaincy is the interesting debate. I think, you know, from a home and away aspect, of course, that tilts towards Bruno this week. I'm not really considering Ekitike so much, but there have been opportunities, at least this season, where I've actually gone against Haaland with an Ekitike captaincy. And I think the reason why I'm not pursuing it this week is because, well, on one hand, I think Ekitike kind of has to balance his minutes a little bit because there's a midweek match here in Gaming 29. Even if he gets a full-on FA Cup rest, which I think will happen for him or close to happen for him, I still have to think that his minutes are a little bit restricted here to sort of manage him perfectly over this run. I think Haaland has been a bit better at sort of managing minutes. Now, of course, we've seen substitutions for Haaland, but mostly for knocks, not for situations where they're just managing his minutes. With Bruno, you don't really even, run into that conversation. So he kind of clears all of them there. And I think Crystal Palace is also a team that possibly, from a form perspective, is much worse than West Ham at this moment in time. Sure, Bruno has not been, someone who looks like an extremely creative player versus Everton, but that was probably the one blip in terms of recent performances under Carrick for him, right? I think he's had much more illustrative performances. He's also looked really, really good at home specifically. So I still like Bruno from that perspective compared to, let's say, Haaland away versus a Leeds team where he's already blanked previously. And as I've said multiple times, a Leeds team who've just been very impressive this season, particularly on underlying numbers. Irrespective of their league position, I think Leeds have definitely performed way above par compared to even some of their promotion rivals, but then also any sort of team in the mid-table, really. So very impressive performances and underlyings, and still within defense, very top. So yeah, I think it's between those three. Ekitike has been a bit quiet as of late, but I think the XGI has still been there. But yeah, with no intangibles like things like set pieces and penalties, I think I'm just going to have to go towards Bruno here. It's another opportunity where I think he's close to Haaland on captaincy. So it goes to what is my risk appetite? My risk appetite, generally speaking, is quite aggressive. I'm comfortable going for a Bruno captaincy here. I guess, if I can lose the Haaland captaincy last week, I can try and lose again, but we will give it our best shot. So I will be going with Bruno captaincy. I'll maybe reconsider with an Ekitike as well, because he's also quite an interesting pick. But I just think that Bruno's a level above still an Ekitike over the course of the season. And I think really just the production this season on an XGI basis, on an actual production basis as well, pretty much confirms that too. So that's going to be my team selection for this week. And we'll jump into my transfer plans right now. So here we are with the Fantasy Football Hub's My Team Pick and Rating tool. It's the tool that I use every week with my transfer plans videos. If you've just been watching the team selection videos, this is a good time to have a look at the link in description below to kind of look at some suggested transfers for your team, but then also to use this tool if you sign up and just basically allow it to kind of manage your fixtures for the rest of the season to kind of see how you want to, fix up your team. Try and ensure that I guess you have a good team put out every single week. So let's just run the transfers that I'm going to make. I'm going to do Palmer out. And it does suggest Mbumo here. But as I said, I think one of the reasons why I'm not going for an Mbumo move here is, well, it's very tight in terms of bringing Thiago in. So let's just bring in Thiago in first. Once I bring in Thiago in, I have 9.2 million left. And sure, I can go Mbumo. But I think the problem here is that I would always have to make Enzo the next transfer out. Whereas I think, generally speaking, as you can see from the projected points model, Enzo is still a better pick than Enzo Lefebvre in most future matches, because a lot of the matches for this Sunderland team going forwards are quite poor. Whereas even Enzo, could be played versus Newcastle at home and arguably also versus Everton away. Whereas I think Arsenal away and Aston Villa away are understandably tougher games. So if I take Palmer out the team, there's a lot of midfielders that I can obviously go with, but I do just like the idea of Wilson because he is so nailed. So I plan to go with Wilson now. This gives me money, right? And this is money to do things in the future like, I don't know, a Richards to a Virgil, or an Enzo Lefebvre into a Dango, or an Enzo Lefebvre into maybe even someone a bit more expensive, right? So we can just walk through that in Gameweek 29. This does boost my team a little bit in Gameweek 28 to a 93% team, which I love. In Gameweek 29, as I said, Enzo Lefebvre can be a cash cow. I probably will keep Enzo because I just think he's a really strong, stable pick to own, slightly better than Lefebvre over this run. But I still have the opportunity to kind of flex into an 8.2 million type midfielder. And that's even the likes of Cunha, which of course wouldn't make too much sense versus Newcastle away. But just for perspective in terms of how much money I can get, I can also revisit the idea of, let's say, bringing in one of the Bournemouth midfielders, right? If I think that maybe Dango, the boat is come and gone for whatever reason, if I think that someone like Shade and KLP are going to play more minutes and maybe Dango's going to lose some of the minutes in Game 29, I could go towards Ryan as well. So I like that flexibility there in terms of being able to do that. On top of that, I also like the idea of just shipping Richards out to a Virgil van Dijk if I really want to make that type of move. It's not something that I'm really pursuing right now, if I'm honest. Virgil has gotten a price rise. Konate is also a pretty interesting competing pick against, let's say, someone like Virgil. But do I really see the need to do that when I have very consistently a strong team every week? Probably not. I think the beauty here is that I can just still roll my team for Game 29. Still a 91% team here playing Enzo versus Aston Villa away. Still better than Arsenal away, of course. But there is an opportunity if I really want to be aggressive, as I said, to make a move like Enzo Lefebvre, even into Dango. If I think I've missed the boat on Dango and I have massive FOMO, I mean, I still have the opportunity to revisit Dango as well. Could I even go for Wirtz? Probably not, right? Because I think Wirtz is a bit too expensive. He's at 8.4 now. If he drops, of course, like maybe there's an opportunity, but I don't think that's going to happen. Cunha is probably the only midfielder that I can stretch to at that sort of price point. So don't want to touch Gakpo because I think his minutes are poor. But yeah, I mean, if Adley's good here, I'm sure Ryan's good as well. And I think I can consider that. Gordon is also another pick that I wanted to mention too, where, we've been talking about midfielders incessantly, but I think people are kind of missing the point that Gordon's also almost stepped up in terms of minutes because he's also got center forward share. So that's also a step up in terms of production as well, in terms of the kind of future underlying. So he's another pick going forwards that I could be, buying potentially in GW28. Does it make a lot of sense ahead of Chelsea away as well? Probably not. But Gordon, I could definitely revisit in GW31. So I think the beauty of making that Harry Wilson move is I'm still comfortable with Harry Wilson here. He's got West Ham at home. In GW30, maybe I revisit Dango here, right? So for example, like we've already gone through the midweek match for Brentford. Maybe if I don't want to test myself, this is also an opportunity to maybe revisit Tavernier. It may be an opportunity to revisit Dango through Enzo Lefebvre. So there's two options that I find quite interesting at this point in time to buy and give me 30. And if I don't want to make anything, once again, if I optimize my team, like I still have a fantastic team. I still have triple Arsenal versus Everton at home, which should be, right? Big caveat there, a clean sheet and a good opportunity to just have a good edge against the rest of the field who probably would have sold most of their Arsenal picks. By Gameweek 31, though, of course, I'm going to be down one player versus, I think, most of the field. I imagine some people would have already sold, their excess Crystal Palace and Arsenal players here. I'll be keeping my triple Arsenal and then probably just selling Richards or Timber. Does it really matter who it is? Not really. But because Anderson and Fulham and co, I guess, have Burnley at home, the options are kind of limitless. I don't really think that I'll be going for Raul necessarily in the forward position. So maybe it's the case in the defensive position that I actually go, if I wanted to be, really patient this whole time, to maybe go for someone like a Malik Thiaw versus Sunderland at home. Or simply also just go towards, I don't know, maybe Kenny Tete, who's back for this Fulham team now, playing right back and quite consistently gets into DEFCON as well. So lots of options. I don't think he'll be Virgil van Dijk, which is also quite helpful to kind of show why I think I don't need Virgil. Yes, of course, I think for a lot of managers, like, as I said, Chalobah owners or people who have a better team than myself in the attacking positions in terms of, the lack of Chelsea in comparison to myself, why people are going for that Virgil van Dijk move. For me, I think I can just about squeeze enough value by sort of ignoring Virgil such that when I get towards giving 32, I don't really ever need to sort of buy him in my team. So maybe I just get Till here for Richards and call it a day. So I think that's going to be what I plan on doing. And if I do successfully do this, I think the pro here is that I should be able to keep 2 free transfers towards the wildcard in Game Week 32. That should give me enough to kind of bench boost and almost fix the team off of the bench boost coming out of maybe a free hit 34, so that I am reasonably well prepared for whatever kind of conundrum double Game Week 36 can throw up at me. Sure, I'll probably lose in terms of, the rest of the field if they plan to do a triple captaincy on a Game Week 36 game. But let's see what happens. So another pro, I think, of going for Wilson too that has sort of been missed in Game Week 31 is when you look at the fixtures for Game Week 31, I think the natural reaction for everyone is to actually go for a Bruno captaincy versus Bournemouth away. But I really do like the idea of Wilson versus Burnley at home. The last time he played at Burnley at home away, I think he had a pretty nuclear haul, probably 1 goal, 2 assists, if I'm not wrong. Maybe my memory's completely fried, but I don't really care about historic games. It's just sometimes the quality of Burnley's defense is right there for the taking. Sure, in some recent performances, they've actually stepped up a little bit in terms of defense, but I don't think that really changes the entire narrative of the season and what they've put up in terms of results so far from an underlying perspective as well. So Harry Wilson, I think, is probably the preferred captaincy when we get towards this game week, and I'm looking forward to that. So that's going to be my full transfer plans and my team selection. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon for more content. Take care and goodbye.